Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Tuesday, January 14th, 2021. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary. Later today, Tuesday, our February issue's content should be up at commentary.org for your perusal. If you are a subscriber, this is a good day to subscribe. The issue is sensational, featuring not only the first Christine Rosen social commentary column, about the regrets, a lot of the regrets caused by present day feminism, but a really remarkable, very authoritative, large scale epic piece by Noah Rothman called A Clockwork Blue, which is about the gradual history of the left and progressives embracing political violence that begins in 1999 and moves to the present. I'm very proud of this piece, A Clockwork Blue by Noah Rothman. Will be available for your perusal. We have a piece by Joseph Epstein on virtuecrats. We have a piece by Stephen Pollard on the grooming gangs. And because we don't have enough Christine Rosen content, Michael J. Lewis, the professor of art at Williams College, has written an essay based around Christine's book, The Extinction of Experience. Bill McClay on Christopher Cox's book about Woodrow Wilson. Mayor Soloveichik on what it means that the song Imagine was played at Jimmy Carter's funeral. Jim Meggs on the possibility that there might be a new pandemic on the way for which we remain as unprepared as we have been prepared for previous pandemics and the like. So this is a very strong issue. Go to commentary.org, click on subscribe. You should subscribe if you are a listener and a regular listener. That's one of the ways that we keep our lights on and keep things going, is for you to actually help pay for our institution, 501c3 nonprofit. If this is not a donation, this is a service that we provide you in the form of a monthly magazine and content on the website. But that would be not only helpful, but I think salubrious for you, for your intellectual life, and for the life of the nation. Very quickly, you guys, Joe Biden went to the State Department and gave the first of his valedictory addresses.
We haven't said hello. I can't function.
Oh my God, we haven't said hello.
Pleasantries.
Let me introduce executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
The person who just attacked me viciously,
Sure.
Even though not only do we have a piece by her, but a piece praising her in the issue, and nonetheless she comes at me with a dagger. Is social commentary columnist and AEI senior fellow Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John. That was very much like when after everybody washes for the challah on Friday night and nobody can speak yet. And the person
I think it's very important.
You know what?
That's a very good reference, but that is so obscure that we have to explain that one of the rituals of a Friday night Shabbat dinner is that you say prayers over the wine and bread, and then you do what is called natilat yadayim. You go and wash your hands. And when you come back from washing your hands, you are not supposed to speak until the challah is cut and you take your first bite of the meal. I don't really understand this ritual, this as we call it, this minhag, but it is the minhag. So Seth, you now know something, if you did not know this, that you could use, I don't know, as a drinking game, or you could go to a Shabbat meal at somebody's house, and when you're not going to be able to see this unless you're watching us on YouTube, but if they start talking, you can raise your finger and like wag it at them very censoriously and make them feel bad. That's a big reason, I think, why we do Natilat Yadayim is in order to cause the person who does remain silent to lord it over anybody who forgets and starts talking, particularly children, because you got to put those kids in their place.
That's right. And there's one loophole. The Jewish people have seemed to make an exception for the word new. You could say new.
Now we have to introduce the word new. The word new, which basically means so or well or something like that. Yiddish word. Yeah, if you say new, somehow that does seem to be like a way you can escape the congestion pricing plan in New York by zipping in and out of the zone. Now we're really getting into the weeds. Okay, yesterday, Joe Biden gave the first of his valedictory addresses, and we're now told, by the way, that he will be interviewed on television on Thursday night by Lawrence O'Donnell. So, that's going to be a hard-hitting, tough, resolute interview in which the underside of his foot will not be licked. But he did speak yesterday at the State Department. Please enlighten us, my fellow panelists, as to the glories of his appearance there.
Well, what struck me so forcefully about it was that he was taking credit for things. He was claiming that the U.S. is in a much stronger position than it was when we took office, and our enemies are in a worse position. He was particularly talking about Iran and Russia, and then on the other side, the strengthening of NATO. This is mostly his taking credit for things that were done by our allies in spite of U.S. policy. Iran is in big trouble security-wise because Israel stopped heeding the Biden administration and went to take on their enemies on every front, unapologetically. Ukraine has kept Russia from swallowing it up because it's been unbelievably brave, not defeatist, as the Biden administration was from day one, when they thought that Russia was going to take Ukraine in a matter of weeks. And Ukraine has been unbelievably innovative because the Biden administration hasn't given it everything it needs. And NATO is stronger, and I'll give some Biden credit here, but NATO has come together because they have a huge Russian threat on their hands, and they were gonna have to do something about that, no matter what.
I was struck by his claim that, and I do want to quote it. He says, "My administration is leaving the next administration with a very strong hand to play." Now, whatever that means, it certainly doesn't mean in terms of the strength and might of our military, which in every budget that Biden proposed had defense spending cuts. And due to the runaway inflation under his leadership, meant that our military is actually in a pretty dire place right now. We actually do need to spend some money rebuilding our defense, updating it for 21st century warfare. This will be I hope, one of the things that Pete Hegseth, who's the nominee for defense secretary, hopefully he'll be asked about what the Trump administration hopes to do with that. But
yeah,
for Biden,
his hearings begins this
today,
morning.
right?
Yeah.
He in about an hour he's going to be sitting in front
an
of
hour from when we're talking. By the time you hear this, it will have been on for a couple of hours, probably.
And although I know he's likely to, Hegseth is likely to have to answer a lot of questions about his personal life, the future of our military is of great concern. And for Biden to sort of glibly declare, well, look, I'm handing you this platter full of, bountiful armed forces is ridiculous. So it is a strange sort of self-congratulatory tone he's adopted about the one issue that we know voters don't trust him on, that the rest of the world's various crises reveal he wasn't successful about. And I'm sure Lawrence O'Donnell will ask him very pointed questions about his legacy in this regard, she said sarcastically.
Okay. So that is the Biden valediction is
part one. Part one.
Yes, because we're going to get domestic stuff later. Of course, what it's going to look like on January 20th is that he will be leaving with Los Angeles in partial ruins, and actually a kind of the stock market going through some kind of a very nervous, shaky moment. So it's going to be at a lower place than it's been in the last 4 or 5 months. I mean, I'm not saying that people are going to say, oh my God, look, look at what he handed Trump necessarily, but it's pretty much there. Now we should talk about what he is handing Trump, or what he and Trump are now handing the world, in the form of what appears to be a hostage deal, or a ceasefire hostage arrangement between Israel and Hamas that is likely to be announced later today, we are told. And I don't know how to sugarcoat this. It's a horror, and it's an unambiguous horror, what is happening here. We can go into the specifics. We will go into the specifics now. We are talking about 33 out of the 98 hostages that we know are in Hamas captivity, some dead, some alive. 33 that are going to be released after the deal is struck over a period of 16 days. Not 98, 33. We are told, or were told a couple of days ago, but this hasn't necessarily been updated, that they will be children, women, and the injured. Although some of them may be dead, so that won't actually be a hostage release. It will be a release of a dead body to be, appropriately and adequately taken care of under Jewish law and buried. So 2/3 of the hostages will be left in Hamas captivity for at least 2 more weeks after the 16 days, assuming the ceasefire holds according to these terms. Negotiations will begin on more hostage releases, which means that we know from little bits of pieces of testimony, including Noah Argamani's testimony and others, that the treatment of the hostages on a day-to-day basis is nightmarish in the extreme. And the question is why, with Iran on the back foot, Hamas almost destroyed, and this new administration that promised hell coming in, to my mind, this deal, which Trump has participated in the form of his negotiating friend, Steve Witkoff, joining the negotiations and apparently yelling at Bibi Netanyahu on Sunday that he better agree to this deal. And, deals have, if you're going to make a deal, you have to make concessions. I don't know what concession it is to say, okay, you get to keep 65 kidnapped people in your custody. That's that. What a great deal. What a terrific deal that is. In exchange for us not killing you, you get to keep 65 of our hostages. Trump's announcement that there would be hell to pay, or hell was going to be unleashed if those hostages aren't released, apparently had a big asterisk there, that it wasn't that all the hostages had to be released. And he is clearly going to join in some kind of a victory lap. He and Witkoff, who has already been making weird victory laps, including going on TV on Sunday night and saying that Qatar, the nation that is Hamas's financial sponsor and protector, is doing the Lord's work in representing Hamas's interests at the negotiating table. You can say, oh, well, anyone can say anything in the middle of a negotiation, except maybe it would be doing the Lord's work if all 98 hostages came out. If all 98 hostages don't come out, he is doing the devil's work, not the Lord's work. And no Jew, and no billionaire American Jew, and no suck up to Donald Trump should be saying that this guy is doing the Lord's work. It's a shameful, horrible thing to say about Qatar. It's a shameful, horrible thing to say about any deal where, if you have to say, look, we had to do something. We have to do something to start the process of getting them out. This is not what we wanted, but this is what we're going to have. That's not what's going on. There's going to be like a triumphalist tone to this monstrous deal.
John,
that's where I'm starting from.
I hate the deal. But aren't there supposed to be follow-on phases where
I just said after the 16th day, then you get to negotiate more hostage releases. That's as I read it. Seth, you're muted. Go ahead.
And there's also what Israel, who Israel's supposed to release.
Right. So one thing we don't know is when the withdrawals happen exactly over the course of the deal. But part of what makes the deal bad is the Israeli military withdrawals from Gaza. So it's not just about the trade. It's also about the fact that they're supposedly going to set up checkpoints to allow Palestinians in southern Gaza to return north to their homes, but only unarmed Palestinians. But also, according to every draft of the deal or every reporting on the deal, Israel is vacating the Netzarim corridor, which is a road that goes from the Israel-Gaza border about maybe 60% the way up Gaza, and it cuts in half laterally to the Mediterranean. So it goes from Israel to the Mediterranean, and what you actually have are North Gaza and South Gaza. It's a sort of demarcation line, and that corridor, which Israel has been expanding at times as needed, is what serves as stopping people from going north to south or south to north with weapons. So this idea that they're going to pull out of the Netzarim corridor, and the other thing we should note about the corridor is that the corridor is known as Netzarim corridor, Netzarim Junction, because there was a settlement in Gaza right around that spot called Netzarim. But within the
Israeli
settlement, right, before the pullout.
The pullout was in 2005.
Right. So within
the Israeli settlement, Israel had 3 settlements in Gaza. There were 3 of them. 8,000 people lived on these 3 settlements, and they were pulled out in 2005. There has been no Jewish presence in Gaza except for when soldiers have to invade in 20 years.
Right. And so it's just named after a settlement that is no longer in existence, but was there in the area. But to the IDF, it's called the Be'eri Junction or the Be'eri Corridor, because it is right outside Kibbutz Be'eri, which was one of the main kibbutzim that was hit hard by the October 7th attacks. And the entrance to the Netzarim corridor is pretty much right outside Be'eri Forest.
It's like 500 meters.
Yeah. And right inside
from the last building.
Right.
In Kibbutz Be'eri.
Right, you can wave, and there are other kibbutzim that are also practically within spitting distance. But the point is that it's called the Be'eri corridor within the IDF because it basically goes from the kibbutz that was massacred through bisecting Gaza. When they pull out of this corridor, that will essentially that is the last preventive measure from Hamas going wherever it wants to in Gaza whenever it wants. They will be marching all this stuff out right past Kibbutz Be'eri. There will be a kind of funeral march almost in watching this. It will be extraordinarily difficult, and it will be a symbolic, I don't want to say victory for Hamas. It will be a symbolic loss.
It's not even a symbolic victory for Hamas. Hamas is all but dead, right? Hamas is all but dead. That's what we keep, which is one of the reasons why the negotiations started up again. Also because Trump is coming in and the Iranians are worried about it, whatever. Hamas is almost dead. Where they are picking off the remnant of Hamas is precisely where you are talking about. In the depopulated northern Gaza, where they are apparently hiding in the tunnels and remnants there that have yet to be blown up. So you are not only moving people north, you are moving people north who are going to be standing atop on the Hamas remnant that is underground. And what are you going to start doing then? You're going to start dropping 2,000-pound bombs on Gazan civilians that you have just allowed to move back into the war zone, where right now Israelis are getting killed 4 or 5 a day. There is fighting going on there, exactly where the ceasefire is going to allow Gazans to move back. So you're also creating a strategic nightmare.
And they'll
Should
be
the
doing so
ceasefire,
before most Israelis could move back to these parts. They'll, these areas, in other words, in the Gaza envelope that they'll be sort of, walk of shaming out of Gaza into, they will be letting Palestinians in Gaza back to their
Palestinians
homes
will
in
be
North
going
Gaza
home,
before
right?
Israelis can come back and repopulate most of
Yeah,
these
we need
Gaza
to explain.
envelope.
We need to explain what this is. The Gaza envelope is the area, the neighborhood, the area of Israel that abuts the Gaza border. And the most famous place in the Gaza envelope is a town city called Sderot, which was for the last 20 years one of the most bombed places on earth before the Ukrainian war, because it was constantly receiving Hamas rocketry fire because it was so close. It was so close they could shoot off land-based rocket launch grenades and stuff like that. It didn't necessarily have to engage with Iron Dome, which is the Israeli preventive umbrella. And Sderot has been a ghost town now for a year and 2 or 3 months. And yeah, the Israelis are going to be moving out, east and north in Israel, past Sderot. Are people going to go back to Sderot? What is the circumstance? And should the ceasefire not hold, what happens then? Then Israel has to go back in and reoccupy the area around the Netzarim crossing because Hamas misbehaves.
And we should note that, by the way, pulling troops out of the corridor is it's not just a road. There are military structures. There are, it's a base. It's like a base that
I mean,
like
they're
7
makeshift. They've
They're
all been put
makeshift,
in
but they're
place in
going
the
to have
last
to,
year.
in
Right.
other words, the idea of going back in would require sort of, doing it all over again.
Right. So the point about the ceasefire that took place when 80 hostages came out, this is now 14 months ago when the 80 hostages came out, was that everybody stood in place. Like the Israelis who had gone into Gaza didn't leave Gaza. They just stopped firing their guns. We're actually talking about withdrawals from Gaza and, as I say, the repopulation of this somewhat denuded area. Looks a lot like the Pacific Palisades, weirdly enough, if you look at pictures of northern Gaza and you look at the fires in the Pacific Palisades. I mean, it's a ruined area, ruined because the Israelis had to take out all the structures under which Hamas might have been hiding or was hiding, or where there were tunnel entrances or whatever. Anyway, so that's the Israeli strategic crisis raised by this deal, which is that they're going to pull out, and then there is a 50% chance they're going to have to go back in. And if they go back in, and there's this new administration, and this new administration is walking around waving its own flag and beating its own breast on how it made this wonderful change where it brought an end to this thing that Biden couldn't bring an end to, how is Trump going to feel about Bibi reinvading Gaza if it is necessary? You think we all say he doesn't care, he wants Israel to win the war and do what he wants to do. Not if his fingerprints are all over this deal. He is not going to want this. He's not going to want it said the first big deal that he was involved in came a cropper, didn't work,
and
Israel had to
we
go
should
back
note, and not if the war is something that is seen as a sort of new-ish conflict that he will wholly own.
Right,
everybody
exactly.
Stands in place, and there's like a
which is
2-week
why,
pause. He can say, I inherited Biden's war. We're trying to end it. If he moves everybody out and says, look, I ended the war, then he's going to be highly defensive of the peace. Yeah.
Right. It's his piece. And look, that means, and we got to say, because, Biden's talking about leaving the world safer than he found all this. Jake Sullivan, Biden's an idiot, right? Jake Sullivan is stupid. Tony Blinken is terrible. Jake Sullivan sold Steve Witkoff, Trump's negotiator, a bill of goods, and Witkoff bought it because he doesn't know anything, got no idea what's going on. He's just a negotiator. So what happens? Sullivan says, this is the best deal we can possibly, trust me. We've been doing this for 14 months. This is the best deal we can get right now. You and I can march out hand in hand. Trump can get credit. Biden can get credit. Bibi will get, oh, it's so wonderful. My friend Yair Lapid over here, head of the opposition, he thinks it's just fantastic. And Witkoff's like, and my friend, the Emir of Qatar, he's great too. He's doing the Lord's work. And then they're going to walk out hand in hand, making this deal with 65 hostages left in Hamas custody. In custody is not even the right word. Why are they negotiating? Why aren't they ultimatuming? The whole point of what Trump did when he started saying, we're going to unleash hell like you've never seen, was an ultimatum. It wasn't supposed to turn into the deal that, Jake Sullivan has been trying to get Israel to agree to for a year, that Hamas has scuttled. This is what we know from Blinken, right? Tony Blinken's told this to Lulu Garcia-Navarro of the New York Times. Every time they went with the deal, it was Hamas that scuttled the deal. Looks like Hamas isn't going to scuttle this deal.
Why would they?
Okay, now, here's why. Because, of course, as Abba Eban famously said, right, the most famous quote of his career, Abba Eban was a major Israeli political figure with a thick British accent, said the Arabs never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. So this is the best deal they could possibly get. They shouldn't be getting a deal at all. This is like saying, okay, you're done, Hitler. Don't worry, we're gonna pull out of Germany. And then, maybe you can stay in your bunker. We'll try, or maybe,
where's the maybe? But it's not maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no talk
Hitler
of
is dead, right?
I mean, that's what scares me, is that any deal, let's say that Hamas follows this to the letter, and that the supposed 3 phases actually happen, and every prisoner and every body is released. Any deal that leaves the remnant of Hamas to live, reconstitute, govern, and fight another day is the height of absurdity.
Well, so the presumption of the deal is that Hamas doesn't really exist anymore in the way that it did, and therefore it can't exactly reconstitute. We don't even know. Mohammed Sinwar Yahya's brother, the now dead Yahya's brother, is apparently the commander on the ground in Gaza, we're told, and it's he who will have to do the final sign-off on the deal, which of course is absolutely ridiculous because it's Iran that is the final sign-off on the deal. That is to say, if Iran says you better do this, they have to do it because they have no other sponsors or friends. And if Iran says don't do it, then they won't do it because they have no other sponsors or friends. Nonetheless, when you look at that, now we should move away from us and Witkoff and Trump and Sullivan and Biden. Just say this is not a promising beginning to the Trump foreign policy. I am sorry. The way Witkoff has been talking and behaving, this is the first major move of the Trump administration, even though the Trump is not in place. And it should not be making anybody who listens to this podcast who voted for Trump be feeling wonderful about what's going to be going on here, because it does suggest that Trump's hunger to claim victories is greater than his care about what the victory is. He wants to rack up successes. That's great. He should rack. We've been talking about how it's like very fertile fruit. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit for him to rack up successes. But if he does them in cheap, third-rate ways, like bargain basement discount ways, rather than doing stuff that will have lasting and positive consequences that speak to what America's position in the world and conservatism's position in the American political firmament are, then things are not going to be as positive as people think. Now, we should talk about Israel now, because this now gets very complicated. This is a deal to which Bibi would never have agreed 6 months ago. He was never put in the position of having to agree or not to agree to it, because Hamas always rejected the deal. That appears not to be happening. And here's what's complicated. People that I know, who are people on the right in Israel, say his government cannot survive this deal. particularly the two parties run by Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, cannot accept this deal, and that they will pull out of the coalition. That is the 64-seat coalition that Likud, that Bibi's party controls, and tank the government with a vote of no confidence. Bibi remains prime minister until another election, but it's a caretaker system. Except that Yair Lapid, as I mentioned before, the actual head of the opposition in Israel, with his party having, I don't know, what did it get, 24 seats or 22 seats or something like that, has said last night that he will instruct members of his party to support the coalition. They will cross over and vote to sustain Bibi's coalition should Ben-Gvir and Smotrich pull out. That is how important it is for him to be part of the hostage deal. Israel is now about to undergo a potential massive emotional civil war, because there are 98 hostages. There are these hostage families. They have enormous emotional power over the rest of Israel. What if your soldier kid is one of the 65 who remains in captivity, while you're hearing about the tortures and starvation and monstrous treatment? And we're going to hear more about it once the hostages come out. Country is going to go bananas, because there's nothing to celebrate here. There is nothing to celebrate if the government has agreed to stand as equals with Hamas in a negotiation, and then not to get what should be axiomatically unquestionable, which is, we're not doing anything to not see you die unless every single one of our people is out of your hands. Then maybe we could arrange safe passage for a couple of people. Or the prisoners that you have who are murderers that you want released are released into custody in Tanganyika or on New Caledonia, or like on an island in Antarctica, somewhere far away where they can't come back and get at us, right? That's part of the terms here, but not if they're holding on to the hostages. And I don't know. So Bibi's got, maybe Lapid will support Bibi's government, and maybe he won't. But if Bibi has to have his bacon, if you'll excuse me for putting it that way, pulled out of the fire by Yair Lapid, he also won't survive. He won't survive another 3 months, because the next time there is a political issue, he won't be supported by Yair Lapid, and then the government will fall because Smotrich and Ben-Gvir will have pulled out of the government, and that's it. He'll have 48 seats instead of 64, and that'll be the end of him. So that's the Israeli side. None of us seems to, I'm trying to think of what good there is here. The only good is if you clear the decks here, that doesn't mean that Israel can't strike Iran.
Well, it's more than doesn't mean they can't strike it. The only thing that anybody can think of for why this deal would be signed by Israel or agreed to is that they got something else that's not part of this deal from the Trump administration. That's the ongoing subject. I think that that's a dangerous assumption, because I think the Trump administration, the incoming administration, is strong arming, is just, is pushing people into, round square pegs into round holes and whatever they can. And they're not actually doing any sort of broader regional thing, strategic thing here. But the hope, I think, is that this clears the way for some kind of, for the maneuvers to take out Iran's nuclear program. That is what people who are trying to think of what could possibly be good about this deal, and what could possibly be good about this deal are things that are not part of this deal. And that we won't really know. We can't know for sure if Trump says, yeah, we'll bomb the Iranian nuclear sites underground and finish it off in gratitude for giving Mr. Trump a win, to start his presidency. But again, it's always very dangerous with anybody, not specifically even Trump, but with anybody, to make one deal on the promise or a handshake of a different deal on a different thing.
I also think it
Fair enough.
doesn't that expectation doesn't make sense when you look at the players. Wouldn't Israel striking Iran's nuclear programs scuttle the quote peace between Israel and Hamas? I mean, Hamas is going to do nothing when its number one sponsor is seeing its nuclear program taken out. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't even
I think the idea
understand
that
the
they would
thinking.
just kill, yeah, that they would just kill the remaining hostages because Iran
Right.
had been really mortally wounded. That would seem to be an obvious. It's like firing. I mean, the one thing is that Hamas, these hostages are worth their weight in gold, so you don't necessarily just get rid of them or tell people that you've gotten rid of them, because then really, there nothing is left. But it's a little like
At
the
part of
Houthis
these at part of
firing off.
these deals is that you don't have to say what happened to the hostages. Israel doesn't know exactly for sure who's alive.
They still, we don't know what they know. We
We
don't
don't.
know what's happened over the last.
The
Yeah.
Israelis say they think they we think most of the 33 hostages in this round are alive. But the point is that they could, if if this proceeded as in this hypothetical, and they wanted to kill the hostages, they could continue. They would continue negotiating with Israel over the hostages and not say what they've done with them. Israel has gotten itself into this kind of Chinese finger trap of
Yeah.
situation here.
I mean, look, Israel has gone through this just almost unimaginable emotional roller coaster, unlike almost anything in any war that I can think of. It was brutalized on October 7th. It invaded Gaza with 90% of the population supporting the idea that they were going to go into Gaza for real, on the ground with hundreds of thousands of people, and do what they had to do to take out Hamas once and for all, and then have been through this, being withheld, being accused of genocide, having aid workers say that the aid is not going through when the aid is being held up by Hamas or being stolen by Hamas. And then, sort of like months of nothing, getting more depressed. So many people in the reserves who are not able to see their families or do their jobs or whatever, and then they're sort of frozen in place by the American demand that they don't go into Rafah. Finally, they go into Rafah. They have success in Rafah, and then there's this huge emotional turnaround with the series of strikes on the axis of evil, right? I mean, the strike against Khalid Mashal in Iran, the pager explosions, the taking out of the rest of Hezbollah, the killing of Sinwar, um, all of that sort of, then they have this kind of manic moment of return of national self confidence. And look, I'm going to just say it outright, like if Kafir Bibas, the 9-month-old who was taken in October, is dead, the country is going to go insane. It's going to be like the last 15 months have been for nothing. That little boy, that tiny little boy, is now the stand-in for the entire country, its mood, its spirit. Whatever victory it may achieve will be like ashes in the mouths of everyone. I know it sounds weird to put it to this level, but Israel was completely overturned for 5 years between 2006 and 2011 by the hostage taking of a single soldier, Gilad Shalit, who ended up getting traded for 1,127 Palestinian terrorists, among whom was Yahya Sinwar, who then lived to plan October 7th. If Kfir and his older sibling are dead, Bibi, not only will Bibi's government fall, but like he'll be, they'll march him out of his house and throw him into Sheol. I mean, this is a very emotionally very fraught moment. And if you are a hostage family whose family member does not come out in those 16 days, what are you going to say on TV? What are you going to say at the Saturday night rally in what's now called Hostage Square in Tel Aviv? What are you going to do? Whom are you going to hold responsible? It's a nightmarish situation, and we have made it worse. America has made it worse because everybody here was just so eager to get to a deal, not to achieve victory through ultimatum, which is what should have been the case, right? But a deal. Not supposed to be making deals. You can forgive Israel for making a deal in November of 2023. What was it, 2 months into the war, to see how many hostages, and if Hamas hadn't started firing rockets again, 80 came out, they could have still been releasing 8 a day until they all got out, but Hamas had enough and then started firing the rockets again and scuttling the ceasefire.
Yeah, and we should also go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is a reminder, a painful reminder, but since Inauguration Day is Monday, it's a painful reminder of some of the ways in which Trump's first term might return in this one, in terms of how he governs, his impulsivity, his desire to be seen as always making new and fresh and interesting deals where he comes out on top. And, domestically, we're seeing this in his reversal on something like, for example, TikTok and the case before the Supreme Court, and his tough words on China, which have now been completely reversed. So we shouldn't forget that those characteristics of his temperament as a leader, particularly the impulsivity, are going to make a lot of these very difficult foreign policy situations that he is inheriting from Biden and that Biden did make worse, much more fraught as we move forward. He's going to need some very clear thinking, back of the room people who aren't going on television and talking about these things to make smart decisions the way he had in his first term with the Abraham Accord negotiations. And I mean, he's capable of finding those people and letting them do their work. But right now, he doesn't seem to be signaling that that's the way forward.
Look, it's important that when he wanted somebody to go over, oh, sorry, please go ahead.
I'm just going to say the irony here is that, as John, you said, this was Biden gave him this deal off the shelf, but Israel wouldn't agree. Israel wouldn't do this under Biden. But
we don't know. We don't know that. I mean, we think that because Israel was never really put to the test, right? It was because
let me put it this way: there's a large added incentive for Israel to do it now, or a pressure for Israel to do it now, because otherwise it gets in bad with the new Trump administration off the bat,
right?
Which is a different scenario. Yeah.
And it was very telling that when he decided to send someone into these negotiations in Doha, he didn't send Jared. I know Jared's out of politics, but if he had said to Jared, you got to go to Doha and finish this up, you think Jared Kushner wouldn't have gone if the president, the incoming, had asked him to, or David Friedman, his former ambassador, or there are 5 or 6 different people that he could have had, including like former secretaries of state. I know he's got weird opinions about Pompeo right now, but he could have asked Pompeo.
He has Jason Greenblatt also. He has
Jason Greenblatt. Like he wanted a guy. He sent in a guy who knows nothing about this because he wanted a negotiator, somebody who is very vain about his negotiating skills and therefore would not come to this with priors so that he could get to a deal. And if you're that, then you're like, well, here's what Hamas wants. Here's what Israel wants. Everybody gets half of what they want. So the Democratic ally in the Middle East that is fighting the cause for right and justice and is destroying one of our greatest adversaries in the form of America's adversaries in the form of this Iranian axis is essentially being treated as equivalent to the monstrous terrorist vicious evil that we have been fighting, America and Israel, for the last 15 months.
But this is one of the key drawbacks of our populist moment. It's not just here in the US, but elsewhere, is that there's this impulse to believe that someone who thinks outside the box, who does things differently, isn't also abandoning moral principle, because sometimes they are. I mean, the way to think outside the box doesn't mean completely walking away from what your country should represent in terms of how it behaves on the national stage. But there's a greater acceptance that just simply doing things differently is the same as doing things better, or in a more moral and forceful way that is desperately needed right now on the world stage. So confusing those two things, unfortunately, is another thing to watch for in the incoming administration.
Right. And the irony is that he's brought in an outsider, but the deal the outsider has struck is about as conventional wisdom as you could possibly imagine.
Which happens, right?
Leave remnants of Hamas in place, try to rebuild, Israel go out. And if there's trouble again in Gaza, Israel can go back in, right? That's literally the story of the entire conflict. And so it's a deal that, it's what happens when you had the Abraham Accords and you had people say, think outside the box. You actually had people saying, let's take these things that are part of the discussion, part of the history, and put them outside, and let's just focus on some of the narrow interest stuff. And this is sort of the opposite of that, because we've gone all the way around, and now we're back to what, again, if Jake Sullivan hands you a deal, just because you, Steve Witkoff, are an outsider, if it's Sullivan's deal, it's Sullivan's deal, and Sullivan is an insider.
Well, they're in the box, and Jake Sullivan is the Jack-in-the-Box clown that keeps popping up, right?
I got another one.
They don't realize they're in the box.
I got another one for you. Let's take it out of the realm of morality and solely in the realm of realpolitik and how America pursues its foreign policy going forward. You don't get all the hostages out. What statement are you making about the use of hostage taking as a tool of foreign policy? Trump said they better let all the hostages out or there's going to be hell to pay. Then they don't come out. Maybe you take some hostages if you're China. China takes hostages in weird ways. They arrest a businessman. They arrest a
we have hostages
journalist.
in Afghanistan right now.
We have 2 hostages in Afghanistan right now. Russia does obviously what Russia does. Is Trump, one of the things that I thought was clear from what Trump's behavior here was a kind of understanding that this had larger consequences. He was saying, don't you ever take an American or I am going to drop, a 2 megaton bomb on your head. And now it's, take some hostages and we'll have a 9-month negotiation like we did with Brittany Griner, or a year-long negotiation like we did with Evan Gershkovich. We're no different. This is Sullivan's deal. Congratulations, entering the new administration and the new world. How scary are you that you got out 33 of 98 hostages, Donald Trump? You know how scary you are? You're not scary at all. You just basically unicized yourself when it comes to toughness. And I think people here who have been very, people listening to, who have been very celebratory about the coming of the Trump administration, we don't know that the deal is done yet. We don't know that everything is we don't know what's going to happen later today. This is not a good start, even if you are as MAGA as you possibly want, because it means he's not as tough as you think he is. Yeah, he'll yell at he'll call Gavin Newsom Gavin Newscom. But when it comes down to it, and there are 98 hostages sitting in a tunnel being tortured, that's too hard for him to go into that room in Doha and say, I'm not kidding. 98 out, or Israel is blowing everything up and we're going to take out Iran's site. And that's what I need by Monday the 20th.
And there's the worry,
and that's what didn't happen.
And there's the worry that if we expect the remaining American hostages to come out in the first wave of this deal. That's a big part of this. what's the incentive for Trump then to get tough later at any other time, right? What's to keep his interest in fulfilling the second half of the deal, in making sure the other hostages come home and all this stuff? He got up at the press conference and he said, they're holding Americans. I've got American parents coming to me and saying, can you at least get my daughter's body back? And all these things. And he, the win is not even so much that he's going to be able to say, look, we got a deal and ended the war. I think first and foremost, he's going to say, I came in, I said, you don't hold Americans hostage. I got the Americans out.
We in the run up to this, all throughout the election and the campaign, Trump would say things like, I'm on Israel's side. Israel has to win, but it has to win fast. And people somewhere around our camp wanted to hear the Israel has to win part, but didn't want to hear the fast part. And Trump's more interested in the fast part than in the win part. And I think part of this problem here is even the threat that was without the larger context, the threat to bring hell there seemed laudatory on its own. Saying by the time I take office was bad, because it actually made Trump desperate for something instead of making Hamas desperate.
Yeah, it was a bad negotiating point, because it's set right. It's like you set a hard deadline to reach, and then maybe it's like, well, they're not going to let out 98, but they'll let out 33. How's that? Is that going to be good as long as they're the Americans? And you go, yeah, and then we take the win. Mm-hmm. So suddenly we're back to taking the win, which of course was what Biden constantly said to Bibi when in instructing him not to finish off or to win the war. This is also a sign that Trump, like every other American president, blinks during the end game. Like that's Schwarzkopf in Kuwait and Iraq in 1991, when Saddam said, "Can I just have my helicopter so I can fly around and survey the damage?" And Schwarzkopf says, "Oh, sure, that's fine. Okay, I'm now going to kill 25,000 Kurds with my helicopters." Well, what were we going to do? Go back in and take them out then? Like, this is not how you end things. People are desperate at the end, and they're going to do brutal, vicious, horrible, if they can, they'll do whatever they can to go out, and they're like Macbeth. They'll go out in a blaze of glory trying to kill as many people as they can, if there's nothing left. And so this is
and boy, as a side note, boy, if I'm Ukraine watching this,
I mean, I don't know what Ukraine. I mean, yeah, it's more like,
because he comes into
office. We better start sending drones directly into Moscow, right? And blowing up buildings in
Trump's
Moscow.
Team comes into office with with the impression that they want Israel to win. He's been saying we want Israel to win. Israel should win, but he never says stuff like that about Ukraine. So this is the war he wants our ally to win.
Yeah.
What about the war that he doesn't really care as much about?
Anyway, so that is the framework, I think, in which to think about today. By the time you listeners hear this, we might already have heard that a deal has been struck, and so we are now, prophesying what might happen, but maybe not. Maybe the deal won't be struck yet, and maybe there can be 11th hour moments of dark nights of the soul where it's like, no, this is not good. We shouldn't be doing this. Let's conclude with a brief summation of Special Prosecutor Jack Smith's, the release of this 137-page report, or 174-page, or something like that, report last night of his what would have happened had Trump not won the election, and thus triggered the Justice Department policy that you don't pursue presidents during their presidencies. I just want to read a little bit from the report and then ask you guys what you think. So the main sentence that people are quoting is, he made I'm sorry, that's not the one I wanted. One sec, where is this? The office had no interest in affecting the presidential election, and it complied fully with the letter and spirit of the department's policy regarding election year sensitivities. What that means is that he is saying that he rushed an indictment of Trump in the summer of 2023 because he was cognizant of the fact that Trump was running for president. And so he wanted to get it in before they could be accused of trying to affect the presidential election. Are you kidding me? You're rushing it to get it in so that it will affect the presidential election. I mean, he actually says they kind of rushed it. And then the main quote, oh yeah, and then at the end he says, "To all who know me well, the claim for Mr. Trump that my decisions as a prosecutor were influenced or directed by the Biden administration or other political actors is, in a word, laughable." Oh, to all of those who know you. So now we're supposed to take on faith the fact that people, according to you, people who know you think you have integrity. That's not how this works. You don't get credit because you say other people say that you're just terrific. What a great guy you are. You are the cat's pajamas, and no one thinks I'm not the cat's pajamas. You know who thinks he's not the cat's pajamas? Me. I don't know him, but he ain't the cat's pajamas. He was doing exactly what it looks like he was doing, and this is the line that I wanted to read off. But for Mr. Trump's election and imminent return to the presidency, the office assessed that the admissible evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction at trial. Okay. This is the sentence that is quoted at the top of all the news stories today. Of course he thinks that. You are not supposed to bring a prosecution at all if you think the evidence is not sufficient to obtain a conviction. Like, he's supposed to be praised for believing that he had sufficient evidence.
So this is where there's a contrast that we have to make, because I want to make sure people also read another prosecutor's report that is not getting as much attention because of Jack Smith's report by prosecutor David Weiss, who was investigating Hunter Biden and all the sort of tentacles of the Biden family business. And he issued a report that was extremely striking in its scolding of the Biden administration and of President Joe Biden in particular. He said the president's characterizations, both of his own prosecution and of the Department and Justice Department in general, are incorrect based on the facts. On a more fundamental level, they are wrong. I mean, these are very tough words. And he talked about politicians who attack the decisions of career prosecutors as politically motivated when they disagree with the outcome, undermines the public's confidence in our criminal justice system. That is, I mean, it's been reported on, but I think the contrast, because both of these reports came out at the same time, between the attitude of Jack Smith and the sort of political motivation we know, and David Weiss, who's really gotten a lot of scrutiny for daring to do the thing that the Democratic Party didn't want him to do, which is look into the Biden family's and Hunter Biden's activities in particular. So the contrast in tone between those two prosecutors is sort of striking.
So I had a little email colloquy with our friend Andy McCarthy, the prosecutor of the Blind Sheikh, of course, legal affairs correspondent for National Review, the best person on these matters. And he said, look, Jack Smith is probably right. That is, say, if he could have gotten it before a jury in D.C., he would have secured a conviction. That's why he tried him in D.C. That's why he ended up judge shopping and getting Judge Tanya Chutkan, who found in every particular, in every way she possibly could for him, and like was going to put her finger on the scale at trial for Jack Smith. And yeah, he probably could have secured a conviction. None of that has anything to do with whether or not the case was justly brought. And his assertions are that because Trump only went to friendly officials during the period when he was seeking to find evidence that the election had been improperly decided, that there were votes to be had. And he only went to Republicans, and he wasn't really doing a fact-finding mission. And that's really terrible. I agree that Trump's behavior was unconscionable. The issue is whether it rises to a condition of criminal prosecution. And indeed, he says that he did not indict under the Insurrection Act
They couldn't find
because
enough evidence for that.
couldn't find enough evidence for that. And therefore, I think he shouldn't have brought this case at all. Why? Because A, Trump has free speech rights, which means he can call somebody and say, can you find 11,000 votes without it being a conspiracy? That's like Trump could say, every American is allowed to make a phone call and ask a question. Was I putting unseemly pressure on Brad Raffensperger of Georgia? Maybe I was, maybe I wasn't. The very fact that he didn't accede to the pressure says something about whether the pressure would have been successful. It wasn't successful. That's one thing. And the other thing is that we have a process by which presidents are to be disciplined for their unseemly or illegal political behavior. And it is called the impeachment process. And he was impeached by the House in 2021. They impeached him. He just wasn't convicted. And so then Jack Smith and Fonnie Willis and Alvin Bragg and, whatever, to come in and take over and seek to do what the political system, in dealing with presidents and their misbehavior, our Constitution tells us is supposed to happen. And that is why there shouldn't have been a prosecution of him for this. This is, by the way, entirely separate from the classified documents case, which at the very least happened after his presidency, and therefore he was a private citizen and could not be held accountable, could be held accountable like any other private citizen. He has no special standing as a former president.
Well, that's why I thought that one of the most interesting parts of this report is where he says, I couldn't charge him with insurrection, right? The Civil War era insurrection statute, whatever, because we have no precedent for charging a sitting government official with the crime of insurrection while they're in government. In other words, if you use the logic of this, as I see it in Jack Smith's report, is that he says this, is that every insurrection was somebody outside the government trying to bring down the government, right? We never had an insurrection, something we called an insurrection legally, that was somebody in office using their office to stay in office. But that is the whole entire premise of all the charges, is someone in office accusing this person in office of using their office to stay in office, right? So there's an unprecedented nature to all of this. And it just kind of feels like Jack Smith saying, well, obviously I can't charge him legally with insurrection because, it's not an insurrection, but it smells like an insurrection. And if somebody else had been charged with insurrection, it feels like one of these working the refs thing where you can say, hey, it matches. It's like the political scientists going like, this was a self-coup because here are all the signs of the self-coup when so-and-so in Kazakhstan self-couped in 1971. And Trump, all the first 7 of 10 on the list Trump makes and whatever. This is a insurrection. It checks the boxes of insurrection, but, whatever. And that sort of feels a bit like handing a, if you're a prosecutor and you're saying what you have and what you don't have, I feel like if you don't have insurrection, you should just say, we don't have insurrection, instead of saying, we could have insurrection, or perhaps had things gone differently, we mayhaps have had insurrection. And I think that sort of the innuendo, the leaving it open to these sort of assumptions and allowing people to take what they want from the report is not really what we're supposed to have.
He knows his audience, Jack Smith's audience. He's creating a narrative arc at the beginning of Trump's second term. He knows who he's talking to in that report, and it is not fellow prosecutors and justice-seeking Americans. It is a narrative, and so that's
how dare you? How dare you? Everybody who knows him knows he would never do such a thing.
I've never met the man.
And he would never ever do such a thing.
And his audience ate it up. I mean, that's exactly. So we have these headlines that, as John notes, are ridiculous. Like this is a big breaking news story. that he believes
Yeah.
in his case.
Yeah. But by the way, Seth gets at a final thing, which is maybe he should have charged him with insurrection. Like, it was already unprecedented that he was pursuing a former president for actions while in office attempting to prevent the swearing in of the new president. So if you're going to pursue a novel prosecution, why didn't you go that way and say, well, there are many forms of insurrection? Saying you don't have evidence, that's itself proof that what you just said about how you weren't looking at this politically is, you're like, I can't charge him with insurrection. That's going to look like I'm going too far. As it turns out, just raiding his house at Mar-a-Lago looking for improperly purloined classified documents, as we now know, was going way too far. It ended up turning Trump's fortunes around, that he did that he pursued that. It appears he was politic enough to understand that there could have been huge boomerang consequences from pursuing the insurrection charge. So he says he didn't have sufficient evidence. Well, screw that. He had as much evidence for that as he had for anything else.
Well, the real
Why is the Brad
were
Raffensperger
the charges that came along the way, John? Like everything that
Yeah,
came.
I know.
Right?
I'm just saying, if calling Brad Raffensperger is a form of whatever it is that he was charged with, why can't you call that insurrectionary? These are, after all, terms that go, that it's something dating back to the Civil War. It's something that's hardly ever been used. Be novel, stretch it. He knew he couldn't do that.
And it's picking
And maybe he knew he
choosing
couldn't do that because he consulted with political officials in the Biden administration that he says he never consulted with, when we know, as Christine says, that David Weiss says that, now granted, this was about Biden himself and his son, so it's a slightly different story, but we know that political officials were interfering with special counsel investigations because somebody just told us on this very same day that the president of the United States was interfering with his special counsel investigation. So how are we not to assume that the same thing wasn't going on with the Trump investigation when he knew Trump was likely to be the nominee of the Republican Party and his rival in 2024? It just doesn't pass the smell test. None of this passes the smell test. All right, I'm going to quickly make a recommendation, then we can go. I've been watching this quite astonishing show on Netflix. I've watched 4 of 6 episodes. It's called American Primeval, and it's about the Mountain Meadows Massacre and the aftermath in Utah in 1857, when a wagon train was beset and 120 people were killed by what it was assumed were Native Americans, members of the Shoshone tribe. And that was the report. It turned out over time that it was a weird, paranoid, lunatic thing that Mormon settlers in Utah had done, fearing for complicated reasons, and that they had staged it to look like the Shoshone had done it when they hired Paiute Indians to help them, and that they also did it, but they were wearing hoods on their heads. Anyway, this is a fictionalized account of this massacre and the aftermath of it. It is, imagine, I was just telling a friend, it's like it should be called Fear the Walking Deadwood. Imagine Deadwood, but it is so violent and so like denuded of color that it is almost like a zombie, it's like a historical account as a horror film, just about it, the sheer unbelievable brutality of the life that these wagon trainers and these settlers and the Mormons who were being chased across the country by the military and the army, and the Native American tribes themselves, who were incredibly brutal toward settlers and toward each other. And it is as graphic as you can imagine. So if you can't take violence, do not watch this thing. But it is gripping. It is stunningly acted, and it is like it is like Deadwood a little bit, like 1883, the Taylor Sheridan prequel series to Yellowstone. and like some other stuff, this kind of like, you know what, enough with the sugarcoating of the experience in the old West. This was as bad could get. Like this is what happens when you live in a world without law. That's really what it's about. There are no laws. There are no settlements. The United States does not have control of this territory. Nobody has rights. Nobody has anything. And so it is like Hobbes. It's like watching the world before the Leviathan, as Hobbes would describe it. It's
Sounds
on
like
Netflix.
a little bit like it's part of Cormac McCarthy's world, Blood Meridian or something.
Exactly. It's very, actually, it is the best. That's a brilliant analogy. It is like the best rendition of Cormac McCarthy that Cormac McCarthy didn't write. Right. Although it doesn't have about it. It's not like there is a looming evil. That's the one difference, because McCarthy's books are always dominated by a sense that the world is like controlled by evil. This is just chaos. And when you live in chaos and lawlessness, then anything can happen at any time to anybody. Anyway, it's very powerful on Netflix, American Primeval. All 6 episodes are available for your viewing. So we will be back tomorrow. Maybe we'll have better news than the news that we anticipate. And if we don't have better news, we'll start talking about the fallout from the worst news as it begins. So for Seth, Christine, Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.